My fiancé is having an affair with my best friend, but that's not even the worst part. My fiancé Jack was having an affair with my best friend, Sophia. Worse, my own family had been helping them hide it. I played dumb, pretending not to know, until the day of our wedding. That's when I discovered their secret group chat, a digital trail of their deceit spanning 18 months. My mom, Sarah, initially tried to shame them, but just a few days later, she asked Jack if he truly loved Sophia. "Absolutely," he said, "but I love you too." That's when my half-sister, Amanda, and half-brother, William, revealed that Jack had tried to convince me to be in an open relationship. He told them our relationship seemed too deep to even bring it up. My mom, unbelievably, offered to cover for Jack and Sophia until he felt ready to tell me about his desire for an open relationship. As I read through the messages, a wave of nausea washed over me. How could my family betray me like this? I wanted to vomit, but I kept scrolling, taking screenshot after screenshot. I learned that Sophia had taken my spot on our previous family trip. I had been sick with a bad stomach bug and couldn't go. I couldn't even imagine what they had done on that trip. The fact that my mother had been okay with all of this was what hurt the most. She'd known for over a year that my fiancé was cheating on me. A few days after discovering the truth, I had a moment of weakness. I sent the screenshots to Jack's parents and explained everything. They called me immediately. They asked if I had any hard proof of their affair beyond the group chat and claims about provocative pictures. I sent them a good chunk of the screenshots. Jack's mother was inconsolable, sobbing and apologizing for her son. His father took the phone and asked if there was anything his son could do to make it up to me. "Unless he can travel up and disappear," I said. "There's nothing he can say." His father understood. I asked them to keep this to themselves until I confronted Jack. They agreed. Later that day, I was getting ready for the rehearsal dinner. Jack told me he had some things to take care of before heading to the restaurant. "That's fine," I said. "I'll see you later." Before leaving, he said, "I love you. This is one of the days I've been looking forward to." "Me too," I replied, trying to keep the rage out of my voice. Once he was gone, I gathered all the screenshots and scheduled them to be sent out at 1:25 p.m., the halfway point of the dinner. The messages would go to everyone: Sophia's family, our friend groups, Jack's family, and mine. A black hole of stress was forming in my stomach, but I headed to the restaurant. My mother and her husband were already there. She hugged me, and I stood there, feeling her hands on me like a violation. I returned a quick, awkward hug to avoid suspicion. Guests began to arrive, surprisingly on time. Once everyone was gathered, Jack launched into a speech about how happy he was that everyone could be there. He talked about how excited he was to have our families mingle and become one. "You're the love of my life," he said. "I'm so happy we can finally be together." I wanted to scream at him, but all I could do was smile and nod. Sophia, looking like a clueless dog, smiled and clapped along. To see this all happening in real life was mind-boggling. How could people be so callous? The stress was unbearable. I barely ate. Then, at 1:25 p.m., people's phones started buzzing. Jack's and Sophia's phones were exploding with messages. A genuine smile, the first one I'd felt all day, crept onto my face. It was like watching a kingdom crumble. The horrified expressions on Jack and Sophia's faces were priceless. That was the one highlight of this emotional day. My aunt went ballistic, calling my mom a cruel, heartless bitch over and over. My mother checked her phone, saw the screenshots, and started screaming. She was furious, accusing me of trying to ruin her life. My grandparents' reaction hurt the most. They started screaming at my mother. My grandmother tried to restrain my aunt, who was now shouting every obscenity imaginable. My grandfather screamed at my mother, "I didn't raise you like this." The room erupted in chaos. Screams, cries, hysterics. My other bridesmaids were cursing Sophia out. I couldn't help but take a perverse sort of joy in it. My grandfather then turned on Jack. I started laughing and sobbing. I was overwhelmed with emotion. The tears just wouldn't stop. My cousin escorted me outside as fast as she could, with Jack chasing after us. He kept screaming my name, begging to talk. I ignored him, My cousin pushed him away from her car and drove off. She took me to my aunt's house and told me to stay there and not answer the door for anyone. I felt like a child left alone. I sat on the floor and cried. All the emotions I had bottled up finally came pouring out. After about an hour, my aunt and cousin came back. They hugged me for a good 5 minutes. When we finally broke apart, I noticed my aunt had a few scratches on her arm. Apparently, they hadn't been able to hold my aunt back from my mom for long. My aunt caught me up on everything. After my cousin drove off with me, Jack had gone back inside and started screaming at Sophia for ruining everything. They got into a screaming match, and some of our friends tried to pull them apart. My grandparents, aunt, and John, my mom's husband, were grilling my mother for answers. John was the most livid. Apparently, during the family trip I couldn't go on, my mom had told John that I had offered my ticket to Sophia so she could enjoy a nice break. John was screaming, reading some of my mom's messages out loud. She begged him to stop, saying she could explain. My aunt added, "You better start explaining because all I see is a worthless mother and a vile person." This set my mother off. She started screaming about how she hated me, how I ruined her life, and how she could never be happy because I was a constant reminder of her biggest mistake. She regretted not terminating me when she had the chance. My aunt, who is infertile, basically pounced on her. I was the daughter she never got to have, and she went full mama bear mode on my birth giver, as I now call my mother. To make a long story short, John is divorcing my mom. He'd had suspicions for months that she was cheating again, and they turned out to be true. Sophia had exposed Jack's texts to her, in which he said he was sleeping with her because he always thought she was prettier and didn't know how to bring it up to me. Sophia's father was bombarding her with calls and cutting her off financially. Apparently, this was all my fault. I was an evil witch for ruining her life, according to her text. My mother had been on a tirade with our family, proclaiming that I was an evil person for destroying her world. My half-siblings felt it wasn't their place to say anything to me. They said I should have expected Jack to look elsewhere because men aren't monogamous and people love who they love. I've been getting texts and calls from everyone. My aunt offered for me to stay with her until I got out of this mess. I accepted. I had no intention of going back to that apartment. I emailed my landlord and would be handling everything next week. My boss emailed me back, saying I could use as much PTO as I needed. I would definitely take it. I was considering moving somewhere quiet and peaceful. I thought things were pretty much settled, but I was wrong. The day after the rehearsal dinner fiasco, I woke up, took a long, hot shower, and turned my phone on. Before I could even unlock it or clear the notifications, I got a call from one of my bridesmaids. She immediately started screaming at me, asking how I could ignore Sophia and Jack in their time of need. I was confused. I didn't give a damn about them anymore. I asked her to stop yelling, but she continued. She screamed that Sophia had hurt herself. I wanted to scoff. I knew she was doing this to rally people to her side because I wasn't responding to her texts. She also told me that Jack had tried to take his life. His friends had found him at my apartment groggy. They took him to the hospital where he was cleared. They were keeping him under observation for the next 72 hours. My friend group was now heavily divided because I hadn't responded to either Sophia or Jack. I still had no intention of talking to either of them. I didn't care what they did for attention, as long as they left me alone. I also learned some other crazy things. I already knew my egg donor, as I now called my mother, hadn't been faithful, but I didn't know the extent of it. She had told her husband that my half-siblings weren't his and a lot of other hurtful things. He had to call the police to escort her off his property because she started assaulting him. John followed up with me that morning. Yes, he was divorcing her. His lawyers were drafting the papers. He told me that she had confessed, that I was the product of a long-term affair she had been having while my father was still alive. I was stunned and shocked, but at least I could take solace in the fact that my egg donor's life was falling apart. After finding out about the divorce papers, my mother tried to backpedal. She called my aunt, begging her to convince John not to go through with it, claiming she would be homeless. She tried to call John and his family, but they ignored her. But that wasn't enough for her. She knew my aunt's work schedule and tried to come over to assault me. My cousin was still with me, so she couldn't get in, but hearing her scream at me triggered some deep-seated insecurities, and I started to have a panic attack. She tried to break down the door, but failed and left. Later that day, I got a call from my half-sister. She tried to apologize on behalf of our egg donor, and then had the nerve to ask if I could watch my nieces while she and her husband went on a trip. I love my nieces and nephews, but I told her to go for herself. If she wanted me to watch her kids, she would have to ask through my aunt. Speaking of my aunt, she and my cousin were currently packing up Jack's things and dropping them off at a friend of his named Kyle. Kyle had been helping me through all of this. He had dropped off my favorite fruit that morning. He assured me that I could talk to him anytime. I asked him if he would be in further communication with Jack. No, he said. I'm just holding on to his things until his parents can pick them up. I really appreciated him. After watching full story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe for more awesome stories like this. Stay blessed and healthy. Thank you for watching and see you in the next story. Bye.